Hello, dear friends. Global cybersecurity is booming in the wake of ransomware attacks. Opinion piece. Risk of cyber attacks. Cybersecurity efforts in the US. Open source security will improve. Cyber warfare forces precautions to be taken. Military risk of an electronic blitzkrieg. It would be a high-altitude electromagnetic pulse attack. Google and Microsoft to spend more than $30 billion. US seeks answers after Kabul airport massacre. Afghanistan, a new sanctuary for jihadists worldwide. Russia to equip its ships with new carrier-killing rockets. Hurricane Ida hits Cuba, leaving heavy rains and thousands evacuated. 6 earthquakes detected in the Alboran Sea, one with intensity of 4.9 degrees. Human chain of 70,000 people to protect the deterioration of Mar Menor. Let's start. Major technology companies have pledged to invest billions of dollars in joint efforts to boost cybersecurity defenses, following a series of global cyber attacks recently. With the growth of ransomware attacks on global infrastructure, the US administration has taken a number of steps to counter the activity, identify the perpetrators, and recover ransom payments after the attack. The State Department announced last month that it would offer up to $10 million in rewards for information leading to the identification of those individuals linked to malicious cyber activity against infrastructure. In order to identify vulnerabilities, hire security experts, and add sound operational practices, last Wednesday, President Biden met with a host of technology giants including Apple, Google, Microsoft, and IBM. Other attendees at the meeting included Amazon and at least 3 cyber insurance providers, Resilience Travelers, and Coalition. Over the course of the next 5 years, both Google and Microsoft will respectively invest $10 billion and $20 billion in cybersecurity-related initiatives. The Alphabet subsidiary has committed its investment to expanding zero-trust programs, helping to secure the software supply chain and improving open source security. Microsoft has also earmarked an additional $150 million for federal, state, and local governments to implement security updates. These funds will also help with the establishment of more cybersecurity training partnerships with colleagues and non-profit organizations. Electronic blitzkrieg. The new blitzkrieg facing the world would literally be an electronic blitzkrieg, so decisive in its effects that our entire civilization could be overthrown in hours. An electromagnetic pulse attack is part of the military doctrines, plans, and exercises of Russia, China, North Korea, and Iran for a revolutionary new form of warfare against military forces and critical civilian infrastructures through the use of cyberspace, sabotage, and electromagnetic pulse attack. There is what is called high-altitude electromagnetic pulse attack, or HEMP, capable of paralyzing an entire continent with a single shot. Logically, many modern weapon systems and military installations incorporate protections against attack, but such protections are complex, deteriorate rapidly over time, and their effectiveness in the face of widespread failure of all surrounding civilian and military infrastructure has not been established. Because high-altitude electromagnetic pulse attack involves the detonation of a nuclear weapon at such high altitude, there are no explosions or other immediate effects harmful to humans, only immediate damage to electronics. Several scenarios have been described in which these protected systems or facilities are transformed into so-called technological islands, which lose their effectiveness or cease to operate as they exhaust their means for autonomous operation, such as fuel, batteries, spare parts, ancillary systems, refreshment crews, etc. The high-altitude electromagnetic pulse attack, or rainbow bomb, is a type of massive electromagnetic pulse attack executed by detonating a nuclear weapon at high altitude, far from the Earth's atmosphere. It would be capable of covering an entire continent, causing complete civil and military chaos in the area, hit the deprivation of essential services, electricity, drinking water, food distribution, communications, etc., for an indefinite period. A single rainbow bomb would completely disarticulate the vital infrastructures of any modern nation, causing the depopulation of large cities and an enormous number of victims due to hunger, epidemics, economic annihilation, and social disintegration. It is doubtful that any country could survive such a situation as an organized social entity. At present, there is still no known effective defense against this type of attack, which requires only a thermonuclear bomb or intermediate power of a rocket capable of lifting in some 300 to 500 kilometers above the target area by means of an orbital or suborbital high-angle ballistic shot. It is possible to protect individual facilities or vehicles by using specific techniques such as the Faraday cage, but not an entire nation. Potential enemies. Russia, China, and North Korea currently have the capability to conduct a high-altitude electromagnetic pulse attack that would shut down the electric power grid and other critical life-sustaining infrastructure. These three countries appear to view the high-altitude electromagnetic pulse attack as the ultimate weapon in an all-out cyber war aimed at defeating US and Allied military forces on the battlefield in a theater of operations as a means of defeating entire nations by shutting down their power grids and other critical infrastructure. Iran may have developed clandestine capabilities to conduct a high-altitude electromagnetic pulse attack, or may soon be able to do so. Russia, China, and North Korea have developed nuclear weapons that can generate very powerful high-altitude electromagnetic pulse attack, exceeding military force standards. Afghanistan. US withdraws troops from Kabul airport. The US is reducing its troop presence at Kabul airport ahead of a scheduled departure date and following a devastating suicide attack. US kills 2 Daesh members. The Pentagon claims to have killed 2 high-profile terrorists in response. The target was a ringleader of the Afghan branch of the Islamic State, which claimed responsibility for the attack. The operation was staged in Nangarhar province in eastern Afghanistan, and according to sources, the Islamist leader may have been hit and killed. Biden pledges more strikes against Daesh. The president has promised more strikes against Daesh in Afghanistan in retaliation for a deadly suicide bombing Thursday outside Kabul airport, and warned that the situation on the ground remains extremely dangerous, with another attack very likely in the coming hours. US seeks answers after massacre. Intelligence agencies were almost certain that an attack was imminent outside the Kabul airport, prompting a warning to citizens to leave the area immediately. Just 12 hours later, suicide bombers walked through the large crowd to a gate controlled by US troops and detonated explosives. US forces allegedly killed civilians during chaos. Some of the dozens of civilians allegedly killed in a suicide bombing outside Kabul airport may have been shot by US soldiers amid the chaos caused by the deadly blast, according to the BBC of London. Taliban condemned US attack on Daesh. The Taliban has strongly condemned a US drone strike in retaliation for the suicide bombing at Kabul airport, calling it a clear attack on Afghan soil. Afghanistan, once again, a sanctuary for jihadists from all over the world. Afghanistan was the country that saw the birth of Al-Qaeda in the late 80s, twice served as a refugee for its leader, Osama bin Laden, and is still home to its current number one, Ayman al-Zawahiri. Now, under the control of the Taliban, the country could once again become a magnet for jihadists from all over the world under the protection of the new authorities. Hundreds of Afghans protest against the closure of banks in Kabul. Hundreds of people took the streets of Kabul on Saturday to protest against the closure of banks and foreign exchange markets, which has been in force for a fortnight on the orders of the Taliban. Excuse me. Withdrawn. The Taliban extend their power as the end of the withdrawal approaches. The Taliban begin to extend their control of Afghanistan as the end of the withdrawal approaches. Of international troops, which will end next August 31st, which is also the date announced by themselves for the formation of their inclusive government. Taliban blockade Kabul airport to most as foreign airlifts dwindle. The Taliban say they are ready to seize Kabul airport and already have some positions, but the Pentagon denies the claim. Taliban forces closed Kabul airport to most Afghans waiting to be evacuated, as the US and its allies closed a chaotic airlift that will end 2 decades of its troops in Afghanistan. US fears another attack in Kabul during its final withdrawal. The US believes it is highly likely there will be another terrorist attack on Kabul airport in the next 24 to 36 hours, in what is being the final phase of its military withdrawal, with the transport of soldiers and material out of the country. Troops begin to withdraw. US allies fear that thousands of people will be left behind in Afghanistan after the August 31st deadline set by Washington for the withdrawal of its troops. The Taliban have warned that the consequences of an extended withdrawal would be dire. Protests. Protesters in Washington demand action on humanitarian crisis in Afghanistan. The demonstration comes amid the continuing evacuation of thousands of Afghans who are desperate to escape Taliban rule before the August 31st deadline. The protesters have gathered to demand action on the humanitarian crisis in Afghanistan in the wake of the Taliban takeover. Trump criticizes chaos in Afghanistan. The hasty withdrawal of troops was, in quotes, the most shameful thing that's ever happened to our country, the former president told Fox News' Sean Hannity. In quotes again, "We look like fools and all over the world. We are weak. We are pathetic. We are being led by people who have no idea what they are doing." Close quotes. Trump tells America to prepare for the week that will change history, but not much else is known. According to Judy Bington, the storms begin Friday, August 27, and ends 17 days later on September 11. The X-22 report says it's all starting to backfire at the central bank and people will know soon enough. Taliban may take over Panjshir in a few hours, but want to avoid bloodshed. Russian ambassador to Kabul, Dmitry Zhirnov, said Saturday that the Taliban could take over Panjshir province in a few hours. In quotes, "I think they could take over Panjshir in a day, maybe even in a few hours, but they don't do it to avoid bloodshed," Zhirnov said. 80% of Afghanistan's budget vanishes. Up to 80% of Afghanistan's budget has vanished now that the Taliban have taken over and Kabul's Western black bakers have cut funding. France to stay in Iraq even if US pulls out. France will keep troops in Iraq for anti-terrorist operations as long as the Iraqi government needs its help, no matter what the US decides to do, French President Emmanuel Macron announced. Europe. Italy ends its airlift to Kabul after evacuating almost 5,000 people. The last citizens evacuated from Kabul by the Italian army in the aircraft Hercules C-130 plane. 58 Afghans were traveling as well as soldiers and diplomatic personnel. Italy thus closed its airlift to the Afghan capital, a mission accomplished, which was summed up by General Luciano Portolano, commander of the Italian Internal Forces. In quotes, "We have evacuated and brought back in just 14 days and in difficult conditions 4,890 Afghan citizens, including many women and children." A last British civilian evacuation flight leaves Kabul. The last British flight evacuating civilians from Afghanistan has left Kabul, ending an operation that has airlifted more than 50,000 Afghans, British and other foreign nationals in the 2 weeks since the Taliban took control. UK, Germany seeks common G7 approach on Taliban. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson and German Chancellor Angela Merkel on Saturday discussed the situation in Afghanistan and agreed on the need for international aid and a common G7 approach for the future government of Afghanistan. Spain. US thanks Spanish closed collaboration in Kabul evacuation. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin on Saturday thanked the close collaboration of the Spanish Defense Ministry and the US Embassy in Madrid for their collaboration with the US Armed Forces in the Kabul evacuation operation. The National Court, the Spanish National Court, rejected asylum appeals of Afghans for not accrediting an individualized persecution. The National Court has rejected in recent months asylum appeals of Afghans for not accrediting an individualized persecution or risk of suffering it for reasons of race, religion, nationality, political opinions, belonging to a certain social group, gender or sexual orientation, according to the resolutions collected in the Judicial Documentation Center. 6 earthquakes detected in the Alboran Sea, one with an intensity of 4.9 degrees. This Saturday, there have been 6 new seismic movements with epicenter in the southern Alboran Sea. An earthquake of magnitude 4.9 with epicenter in Alboran has been felt this Saturday with clarity in Melilla and in several localities of the provinces of Malaga, Granada and Almería, especially in the coastal area, and in some inland such as Jaén. The earth tremor was registered at 13:20 hours and could be felt in Melilla with great intensity, as many people went out frightened to the street. Training program for young entrepreneurs to combat depopulation. The Diputación de Almería will train young entrepreneurs in digital marketing so that they can further boost their business projects. It is financed by the European Social Fund under its Young Employment Operational Program. Thousands of people form a human chain to protest against the deterioration of the Mar Menor. The Mar Menor, the largest saltwater lagoon in Europe, is suffering a strong deterioration. In recent weeks, dead fish have appeared in its waters, and the neighbors and ecologists demand a solution. Some 70,000 people have managed to embrace the Mar Menor from the end along the 73 kilometers that compose it, and have kept a minute of silence for the thousands of animals that have died in recent days as a result of the episode of anoxia in the lagoon. Spanish America. Hurricane Ida hits Cuba, leaving heavy rains in its path and thousands of evacuees. Ida arrives in Cuba, and with it its wind gusts of up to 140 kilometers per hour. It is the first hurricane of the Atlantic hurricane season. It first made landfall on the Isle of Yauz, and then entered the far western part of the country. Cuba to regulate use of cryptocurrencies. Cuba said this week it would authorize and regulate the use of cryptocurrencies, a move that could help the country circumvent sanctions that have complicated transactions through the international banking system. Gulf Coast residents flee Hurricane Ida. Hurricane Ida intensified Saturday over the warm waters of the Gulf of Mexico, prompting tens of thousands of people to flee coastal areas, while President Biden pledged aid for to help states recover quickly once the storm has passed. China asks citizens to stay away from cryptocurrencies. The People's Bank of China has asked Chinese citizens to avoid using virtual currencies which have not been legalized in the country and are not backed by real value. China bans its companies from trading with the US. China launched a multi-pronged attack on its technology companies, threatening to curb their ability to list in the US, seeking to tighten regulation of algorithm use and sidelining their cloud computing businesses in a major city. U.S. warship transits Taiwan Strait after Chinese assault drills. A U.S. warship and the U.S. Coast Guard cut through the Taiwan Strait on Friday, the latest in that Washington calls routine operations through the sensitive waterway separating Taiwan from China, which claims the autonomous island of Formosa. Miscellaneous. Russia to equip warships with new carrier-killing rockets. Russian warships and naval vessels will soon carry new advanced missiles designed to take out enemy ships with a single critical hit, after Moscow's defense ministry signed a contract with their manufacturer. United Nations chief calls on Lebanon's leaders to form effective government. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres on Thursday expressed deep concern over the deteriorating socio-economic situation in Lebanon and called on all political leaders to urgently form an effective government of national unity. His spokesman said, "Gun that killed Billy the Kid sells for $6 million. The gun that killed Wild West outlaw Billy the Kid sold for more than $6 million at auction Friday in Los Angeles, more than double the pre-sale estimate." Cat survives cat locked in abandoned house for 2 months. A Dutch cat has managed to survive for nearly 2 months, locked in an abandoned house. The extremely malnourished animal, who had to resort to eating paper, was discovered by the new owners of the property. Besides being malnourished and weakened, he turned out to be healthy enough to be released a day later, ending up in the animal shelter. Reflections. When a person is seduced or willingly joins those on the dark side, they become an operative of the wicked at some level, and two things happen. First, they get a material reward, and second, a ceiling of darkness comes between them and the source, between them and the Creator, so that they can no longer use the source directly to manifest their reality. Hence, the resort to spells and other indirect methods. The Creator is in control. In quotes. As you travel this journey of life, do not expect to be perfect. The Creator is aware that you are not perfect and that you would make mistakes. So, would all of your fellow man. Forgive them, forgive yourself. Achieving success is not about the outcome, it is about the process. Fall in love with the commitment to the process, and let the results take care of themselves. It is the joy in the journey that matters. And that's all for today. Thanks a lot, dear friends.